Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Astrology, and tonight we are going to be doing a very special Twitch stream. Normally, in these Twitch streams, I only do one chart a night. Tonight, we're going to be taking a look at actually 3 charts. So, as you know, the stars of Heated Rivalry, Storrie, and Hudson Williams, to be exact, are going to be featured on my channel tonight. I'm going to be looking at both of their charts. And the third chart I'm going to be looking at is a Sinistry chart. Now, for those of you who don't know what a Sinistry chart is, it's a chart where we put 2 charts on the same, 2 wheels on the same chart and compare them. So that's going to look at their real life, of course, charts and see how well they mesh up. I figure if you're doing a series about 2 people who are intimate partners, it's important that they work well together as actors. And so I pulled both of their charts, and I also pulled their Sinistry chart. Okay. Now, one of the things that you should know before we do this is that Storrie's chart is the one I'm going to look at first. That's the one I have on the screen. But you're going to notice it has a 12 p.m. birth time, which means we have an unknown birth time for Storrie. However, Hudson Williams does have a birth time. So when I do the Sinistry chart, I'm going to use Hudson Williams' chart as the anchor chart in the middle, and then I'll put Storrie's chart around it. So I hope you're going to find this enjoyable and educational. Please hit me up with questions in the chat. Looking forward to working with you all tonight. So let's see what we've got. Okay, as usual, we're going to start with the rising sign. So we have Storrie here. So let's pull up his chart a little bit more closely. And I'm going to point this out, and I'm going to be very specific here. If Storrie was born at noon, he would have a Gemini rising. But because we don't have a birth time, I'm purely going to be looking at the planets. In this particular case, we have no idea what his birth time is. Therefore, we can't do anything with his rising. It also means that we can't do anything with his houses because we don't know where they begin and end. So with Connor, I won't be talking about houses and I won't be talking about his rising sign, but I will say if he was born at noon, exactly at noon, he would be a Gemini rising. But in this case, that's not even relevant. So, but I wanted to point that out so that you understand how that works. So let's look at the sun first. All right. So we have Pisces sun here, and with Pisces sun, we often see some really amazing, sensitive, emotional qualities. We often get people who are extremely compassionate. We get people who are very aware of the energy around them. I like to call Pisces sun people the sponge because they soak up all the energy around them. Pisces people need to surround themselves with good people with good intentions. Pisces people do have a tendency to believe sob stories, and so a lot of times they're more easily taken in than some of the rest of us. But it's because they have so much compassion and they don't want to see other people suffer. I also like to call Pisces the 24-hour confessional because Pisces people are typically excellent listeners. They're good secret keepers. But they're not particularly good at talking about their own emotions, which is funny because a lot of Pisces people believe that they have more sensitive emotional antenna than anybody else. Now, to be fair, there's an argument to be made for that. If you wanted to talk about the 2 most sensitive signs out of the gate, without looking at anything else, 2 sun signs are Pisces and Cancer. Those are probably the 2 most sensitive naturally astrological signs. Again, we could have an argument over which was which, but Storrie is definitely quite a very sensitive person. Now, as we look at this, again, keep in mind that we're not dealing with houses, But we are going to make sure that we talk about each of the planets and in what signs and how they're working, because that's going to be valid for us here. Okay. Now the sun only moves about 1 degree a day, so this placement for the sun is within 1 degree of where it is, so it's just about right. There's not going to be much difference there. The moon, however, is another thing entirely, because the moon is the fastest moving astrological body we have. The moon moves about 12 degrees a day, okay? The word month comes from the word moon, and the ancients noticed that all 12 signs of the zodiac with the moon would go through their moon phases, The moon would be in all 12 signs, and when it went through all 12 signs, it was considered a month. It's actually 28.333 days. Okay, so when we're looking at someone's moon sign for which we do not have a birth time, we have to add and subtract 6 from this number to give us an approximate idea of what the moon sign is. Now, if you look at this, you're going to see that the moon is at 12 Libra at noon. Okay, which means that if we were talking about adding 6 degrees, it would be 18 Libra. If we're talking about subtracting 6 degrees, it would be 6 Libra. So there's no change in the moon sign. So we know that Connor Storrie is a sun sign Libra, no matter what. That's going to be the case. Now, again, as we've talked about before, when I've seen charts, other charts without birth times, like Alicia Liu's, for example, Alicia Liu had the sun in her sun sign, in the sign that it was in all day up until about 9:30 or 10 at night. And so we could kind of conclude that it was more likely that she was one sign than the other. But again, because we don't have a time, we have to estimate a few things. Okay, but definitely in this case, Connor Storrie's a Libra moon. The Libra moon. So, moon is our mother. Moon is instinct. Moon is our ability to emote. Okay, the moon is, I call it crisis mode, because it's what we do as a knee-jerk reaction to things. And really, one of the things you need to keep in mind is that the moon is also our security. We feel more secure with certain things. So if we're talking about Connor Storrie, what makes him more secure? Well, he's likely more secure in relationships. Libra moon often gravitates toward other people, as you probably guessed. It gravitates toward relationships. He gravitates toward situations where there is emotional balance. Likely he does not like being around people who are kind of all over the place emotionally or very chaotic. Libra moon also makes a person more comfortable in any kind of relationship, or comfortable having people around, having their friends around, intimate partners, others around. Usually that makes a Libra moon person more comfortable. Likely, because Libra is a Venus ruled sign, and again, because we don't have the houses, we can't really say to any more specificity, but Libra moon also can indicate someone who is a people pleaser. A lot of times with Libra moon, we want to make the other person happy. There can be this emotional attachment to another person that might not always be healthy, because it's attached to the relationship and not necessarily the person. Okay, so likely Connor Storrie is very comfortable being in relationships. Likely he likes having other people around, but this is someone who likely also is a people pleaser. All right, let's look at Mercury. Okay, we have Mercury in Pisces retrograde. Okay, this is one of the more challenging planets for Connor, because Mercury in Pisces is, depending on how you look at it, it's either a planet in fall or in detriment. Planets in fall really struggle, and planets that are in detriment start about 2 lengths behind everybody else. So when Mercury is in Pisces, we often see someone who is attuned to nonverbal things. Is it tuned to energy? Is it tuned to subtlety? Especially given the fact that it's in Pisces. The general idea for Mercury in Pisces is that they're not usually particularly talkative. They want to make sure that we are, that they're good listeners, but they don't really want to talk about their emotions, probably because they feel like they're so incredibly sensitive. Okay. And the other interesting tidbit on this one is he actually has a natal Mercury retrograde. Now, about 20% of people have a natal Mercury retro. But with Mercury in Pisces, with a natal Mercury retrograde, that, folks, can be quite challenging because it turns the Mercury energy even more inward than someone who has Mercury in Pisces already has it. So I am really hoping that Connor communicates well. In his case, he could probably over-communicate and be just fine, because the people around him would likely be very happy about that. They would know kind of what's going on. Okay? So, again, when we're talking about Mercury in Pisces, they do well with things that are imaginative and creative. So, for example, creative writing, writing poetry, that sort of thing, they'd usually be quite good at. But when it comes to day-to-day communication, especially given the retrograde, this is likely something that Connor Storrie has to work on, or had to work on. Okay. All right. All right, let's look at Venus next. And as we zoom in, we notice that Venus and Neptune are conjunct. Now let me get to Venus real quick. We know that we don't have a birth time. We know this, okay? But what's really important that you are doing is you make sure that you are considering how fast the planet moves, okay? And in this particular case, Venus moves a little bit more than a degree every day, typically with the sun. So we're talking about somebody who is likely going to have that very strong Venus-Neptune connection. Because honestly, folks, even if you were born earlier in the day, Venus is in direct motion, so it wouldn't be more than a degree or so away anyway. Definitely you'll want to check that out, and you'll want to make sure that you remember that. Okay? But in this case, we definitely have Venus and we definitely have Neptune as a pair together. Okay? And we're absolutely going to talk about that, because we know that that's the case. So let's talk about Venus in Aquarius. Okay, Venus in Aquarius is a desire, because Venus rules what we want, is a desire for connecting with a lot of people in groups, but not necessarily individuals. Aquarius is a sign that is actually can be kind of aloof emotionally. Hi, Ranger Jody. Good evening. Nice to see you. Venus in Aquarius actually does like people who are different. That's one of the most amazing qualities of the Venus in Aquarius person, is that they want people who are different. They want people who are almost so different that they might be rejected by society. And Aquarius is a sign that always wants to make things better. So your Venus in Aquarius people are often attracted to people who are very different. Also, people who are a little bit weird or bizarre or quirky or nerdy. I could see any of those possibilities. And also, the Aquarius is a sign that deals with equality on all levels. So for someone with Venus in Aquarius, this is someone who likely is extremely accepting of anyone, no matter what their gender is or isn't, no matter what their sexual preference is or isn't, any of that. Venus in Aquarius is very welcoming, which is likely one of the reasons why Connor Storrie is very comfortable playing an LGBTQ character. Okay, he's playing a gay character in this, and so it's very important for you to understand that because he has that Venus in Aquarius, it's likely going to make that easier. Now, I actually have to look and see if he's actually gay in real life. I was going to say I didn't think so, but I haven't actually, I haven't dived into it, so I'm not going to say either way. But if he's not, this will make his ability to play someone who is gay a lot easier. Now, Neptune right next door. So these two, both of them, deal with creativity. But Neptune's creativity is really, really sensitive and off the charts. Neptune is about fantasy. Neptune is about playing roles, as we've talked about before. Neptune is about getting lost in the boundless ocean. And once again, we have a planet that's in Aquarius. Now, of course, the Neptune and Aquarius people, there are going to be millions of you out there, okay? Because Neptune only changes signs once every, I would say about every 14 years or so. And so there are going to be many of you. And normally what we would do is we would look at the house, but of course we don't have a house. We don't have a house here to work with. But these two planets together are amazing for anyone who does acting as a career. Just straight up. That is an amazing position to be in because it's creativity and sensitivity both together. Depending on what house they're in, whoo boy, if we actually knew what house they were in, we could really delve into it. But of course, we've got a few more charts to do tonight, and we've got the Sinistry to look at. So, but I will say that if you're looking into any kind of creative career, if you see Venus and Neptune conjunct, square, or opposite, in other words, if they're right next to each other within 7 degrees, if they're within 180 degrees of each other, like I said, with 7 degrees off, or 90 degrees apart with 7 degrees off. Again, 7 degrees is my rule, but other astrologers use different, we call them orbs, okay, different ranges. If you see that in a chart, you're really going to see how the actor transforms into this role. And this is a role, I mean, all of them, you'd have to be pretty convincing, but in a role like this, especially given that that the main character is gay, this is perfect. This is an absolutely perfect setup for that. But any role that Connor Storrie takes on, he's going to do well in because he can really become the character that he's playing. Okay, that's a big one. All right, let's see if there's one or two other things that we can say about this chart before we move on to Hudson Williams. Hudson Williams' chart does have houses, so we're going to spend a little more time there. But one key point I am going to mention is that here we do have Pluto. Now, these actors were born within a year of each other, so they're going to have a pretty close Pluto connection. And what's going to make it even more interesting is when I show you Hudson Williams' chart and where this ends up. But I want to throw that out there for you now. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at Hudson Williams. And you're going to see for this one, we do have a birth time. Hudson Williams born February 13th, 2001, and in Canada. And look at that. We do have a Gemini rising here, so let's take a look at it. We have someone who is a Gemini rising. The rising sign's at 12 Gemini. And the Gemini rising person is going to be looking at the world through information. Okay, they're going to be interested in information. They're going to seek out information. They're going to be very good listeners. They're going to be very good at potentially working a room. So when you see at a party someone knows how to work a room, Gemini rising definitely helps with that. Gemini is the consummate talker. I like to call Gemini the broadcaster of the zodiac, or, you know, if you want to be less polite about it, the chatterbox of the zodiac. And so this is the mask that Hudson Williams is wearing as he goes through life. So he looks at the world this way. People see him this way. Likely they see him as very bright. When you have Gemini rising, you can also keep a lot of balls in the air, folks. Now, Gemini's ruling planet is Mercury, so let's take a look at that. Okay. And we have Mercury in Aquarius. Now, Mercury in Aquarius is extremely bright. These are folks who really are good at stepping back and being objective. They know how to give their opinion and their findings without allowing their emotion to get involved. I often think of the sign of Aquarius almost in some ways like Mr. Spock, where they say, highly illogical. But they can focus on the details without having their emotions impacting the outcome, which is great for any kind of advisory role. Aquarius is a sign too that if you know someone has a lot of Aquarius placements, in this case, Hudson Williams has 4, you can probably talk to them about just about anything. They will talk to you and they will engage with you. They'll debate you. Aquarius people love a good debate. And then afterwards, they don't take it personally. They're like, oh, well, you feel that way. I feel this way. Okay, let's go have dinner. Or let's go out for a drink. They don't take that seriously because they accept where everyone is. Pretty much Aquarius is the ultimate sign of namaste, which is I accept you and where you are right now. They're typically very good at that. Now, as I look closer, I circled the Mercury retrograde. So in this case, both actors have a Mercury retrograde. Again, not something that's particularly rare for both of them to have it. If they were in a relationship in real life, one of the things I would be telling both of them is you need to over communicate. You need to make sure that you're actually telling us what's going on, because 90% of the stuff that goes through a Mercury retrograde person's head doesn't get out to us. So if you look at charts and you see a Mercury retrograde in someone that you know, make sure you are asking them to communicate often and be prepared to listen to them when they do. If you are the one that has Mercury retrograde, then you also need to realize that with that necessity to be over communicative, you're also going to find that there are some potential side effects that go with that because Mercury is the planet that rules the nervous system. So we're talking about potential for anxiety, potential for racing thoughts, potential for insomnia. Again, doesn't happen to everybody, but because that Mercury energy is turned inward, those are a few of the potential side effects of having a Mercury retrograde natally. What is interesting, though, is if you have Mercury retrograde natally, when Mercury is transiting retrograde, and the next Mercury retrograde, by the way, is at the end of June, folks, in Cancer. But as we get closer, I'll talk about that too. We need to remember that if Mercury is transiting retrograde, if it's moving backward in the zodiac, and you have natal Mercury retrograde, you might actually feel more comfortable while everyone else is freaking out, because you may deal with that much more easily than we do. So if you have Mercury retrograde natally, that's something just to keep in mind. You may find that you do okay with that. Okay. And so let's talk about planets in Aquarius. We have 3 right here. And we talked about Mercury, but we have the Sun in Aquarius, and we have Uranus in Aquarius. Okay. So one of the things that you will find is that if you're dealing with, oh, hey, One True Cripple, good evening, welcome aboard. If you find that you have planets that are within 4 degrees of one another, actually it's more like 7, I misspoke. You're going to notice that this planet is at 21, this one's at 23, this one's at 25. This one over here, this is the part of Fortune, which we won't talk about tonight. It's not a planet though. So one of the things that you can keep in mind is that if you have planets within 7 degrees of each other like this, that's called a stellium. Okay, this is a true stellium. Any 3 planets within 7 degrees, that's a true stellium. Now, some of you are saying, well, wait a minute, John, you've got another Aquarius planet over there, and it's right here. It's Neptune in Aquarius. But technically, ladies and gentlemen, that's not part of the stellium, okay? Technically, folks, we're talking about a sign stellium. So we have a true stellium with Sun, Mercury, and Uranus, and we have a sign stellium with including Neptune, a sign stellium in Aquarius. No matter how you slice it, we got 4 Aquarius planets. That's a lot of energy, especially because we have Uranus in Aquarius. Uranus is the ruling planet of the sign of Aquarius. So a lot of that energy is even more powerful because it has a very powerful support system behind it. All of these planets, because they are in Aquarius, are going to be calling back to Uranus for support. And he's able to support them very well because he's doing extremely well in the sign. He is in what we call rulership. Now again, I've said this before, but it bears repeating. When you're talking about a planet in rulership, it doesn't mean it's the best one. Again, I say this for people who have Sun in Leo, right? It's not the best one, it's just the most powerful one. Okay, there's a difference. We don't really use the idea of best in astrology. It's all about how you play the cards, but you've heard that spiel from me before, so I'll just imagine saying it and you can imagine hearing it. How about that? Anyway, all right, so as we look at this, we're going to find this very powerful setup. With Uranus in Aquarius, this is someone who's going to be very open and welcoming. Once again, this is a perfect person to play a gay character. Absolutely perfect, because there are so many planets in Aquarius. This person, Hudson Williams, is likely incredibly accepting in his real life also, which is a great thing. Keep in mind as well that right now Pluto is transiting. Pluto is transiting Aquarius. In other words, it's moving through Aquarius. Right now it's actually at 5 Aquarius, and it's moving forward. It will actually be going retrograde on May 5th, so it'll be moving backward, but eventually it'll be moving forward again. So if Hudson Williams were my client, I would say to him that likely over the next 6 to 7 years, he has a lot that's going to be happening as Pluto moves through this area. Pluto's job is to really make sure that we remove things from our lives that we no longer need. He's the transformer, but he's also the zodiac's trash man. Okay, I like to call Pluto the astrological fire sale, folks, because everything must go with Pluto. Like I've told you before, you're talking to a guy who for the last 5 years has had Pluto making a square to his sun, and I have had tons and tons of changes. But after looking back at it, it was challenging, but a lot of things that needed to go in my life have gone, and I have space in my life now for new employment opportunities, new opportunities to do stuff like this. I have a lot of new friends. I have a new home, which I'm very happy about. So as long as we don't hang on to things when Pluto makes its way through, we should be in good shape. But as I said, if he were my client, I'd be telling him, yes, changes coming. And yes, Ranger Jody, yep, good changes. It takes a little while to get there, and Pluto sometimes takes away things that we're still using, which I gotta admit is kind of a pain in the ass. But generally speaking, Pluto will give you plenty of warning to let go of what you need to let go of, so new things can grow, and that's the point. So anyway, all right, let's take a few more minutes on Hudson Williams' chart before I look at the Sinistry. Okay. Now here we've got a very different Venus. So in Connor Storrie's chart, we had Venus in Aquarius. Here we've got Venus in Aries. Okay. Venus in Aries is challenging because Venus is in a Mars-ruled sign. Venus in Aries is a lot more interested in physical stimulation than emotional stimulation. Now, as we've talked about before, with Venus and Mars, we really shift the focus of each one of them in relationships. Really, one of them is emotional intimacy or connection. That's really your Venus and Moon. But the physical connection is absolutely Mars. And so when you have someone with Venus in Aries, they can be very interested in chasing, pursuing, and having physical intimacy with folks, or a straight up, we can just call it stimulation. Okay, it doesn't necessarily need to be physical intimacy, but they want to get involved with people and they want people to stimulate them. Whereas if you get Venus in another sign, it's probably going to be less. It's going to be less of a problem in some ways. Again, with Venus in Aries, it's all about how you play the hand. So I could see this placement as someone who is very interested in the more physical side of relationships and wanting to get involved a lot more quickly. But Aries is a sign also that can be out of relationships rather quickly as well. So hopefully the Venus in Aries person, in this case Hudson Williams, really has learned to value himself enough so that he doesn't feel like he has to validate himself through lots and lots of physical relationships that don't go anywhere. All right, now we talked about Venus. On the flip side, we have mighty, mighty Mars. Okay, Mars and Scorpio. In the ancient world, Mars ruled the sign of Scorpio. And so I consider this to be a planet in rulership. Mars in Scorpio is much more subtle than its counterpart, like Mars in Aries, which is in rulership. Also, Mars in Scorpio has this undertone of mysteriousness or sexiness, or even in some cases, a little bit of fear, because people are concerned that about what you're going to do, even if you don't do it. Scorpio Teddy Roosevelt used to say, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." Well, with Mars and Scorpio, when this person decides to act, it's going to be intense and powerful. But likely it's going to be under the radar, because Scorpio typically does not telegraph its intent. If you are someone who really, for whom physical intimacy is very important, then you definitely want someone with Mars and Scorpio. They will definitely keep you very, very happy. We'll say that. They're very intense, and physical intimacy is very important to them. Okay? But again, we have both parts of the relationship equation, if you will. Both of them are Mars ruled in Hudson Williams' case. So we're talking about somebody who is likely a pretty intense person when it comes to relationships, and I'm sure that comes out when they're doing scenes for the show. I'm sure it does. Now we are going to talk about Hudson Williams' Moon as well, because that's one that jumps out at you. Okay. I'm not going to lie, folks. Scorpio Moon is one of the more challenging moon positions there is. As I've said before, I think of the moon as a river. When you have the moon in Scorpio, the river has rapids, the river has waterfalls, the river has pools that kind of go off to nowhere. It's got rocks that can rip out the bottom of a boat. It can be very challenging to work with. It's very intense. It can be very focused on things that don't seem very important emotionally. Like, it can cause a lot of emotional drama. I've often seen it where people who have Scorpio Moon, if they're not careful, do have a greater tendency for divorce, problems with physical intimacy in relationships, as well as potential for really bad jealousy or revenge or even obsession with people. The moon in Scorpio is challenging. Again, nothing that you can't overcome, But starting off with that is difficult, especially if you pair Scorpio moon with early childhood trauma. That's really where it gets tough for Scorpio moon. Yes, trauma is difficult for anyone, but Scorpio moon people are incredibly sensitive, and it really, really can harm them potentially more than others. So with the Scorpio moon, likely this is a person who had to grow up trying to figure out how to deal with all of the emotions that they have inside that are so powerful. And as you know, if you're 10 or 11 or 12, it's really hard to learn how to figure out what to do with all of that. And so that's why when you look at a chart and you see a Scorpio moon, one of the first things that you need to consider with the person whose chart you're looking at is where they are emotionally and how they've chosen to live their life. Now, as we've talked about before, your job in this life is to go from moon to sun. So Hudson Williams is supposed to go from Scorpio moon to Aquarius sun. So his job is to become more impersonal. His job is to become less focused on the emotion and more focused on being objective. His focus is less on being jealous and more on seeing people for who they really are and not taking it personally. That's going to be that's probably going to be one of the big parts of his overall development. All right, obviously with a chart that we have, where we have the birth time, there's always a ton to say. I am going to point out one more thing though, because we do have houses. This is the midheaven, ladies and gentlemen. The midheaven is our career line. And we have Hudson Williams, who has Neptune right next to it. Now, we were just talking about Neptune and how important it is in the charts of actors. Well, this is a great placement for Neptune in the chart of an actor. It's right behind the midheaven. It's within 5 degrees of the midheaven. Typically, I use a 5 degree on either side of a line like this for all of the angles. If you see a planet in one of those places, you're going to pay attention to it. So Neptune in this chart is a heavy hitter. Now, of course, if you look on my chart, you're going to see that Uranus looks like it's close to the midheaven also, but if you look at the number, it's actually 21 degrees. I have my astrology software set up so that it's evenly spaced. So don't be fooled by that. If you have a question, look at the number. And because his midheaven is at 9 and Uranus is at 21, that's not going to be within range. But it's still in the 10th house of career. Okay? Really, really interesting stuff. Let's see if there's anything else close to... yes. The other planet that we want to talk about is Pluto. Again, the Pluto in Sagittarius generation has millions of people, but not many people have it right here on the descendant. Purely by the position of Pluto alone, this is a big deal. Okay, this is a really big deal because it gives Hudson Williams a very powerful feel to him. There are some people where you meet them and you feel a little bit intimidated by them. Likely, Hudson Williams falls into that category. And it also shows, because Pluto is in the 7th house of relationships, that in real life, Hudson Williams will really in many ways be defined by the quality of his relationships. He will find that relationships are going to have a very powerful influence on him, positively or negatively. So when you see, Pluto in the 7th house, but especially one that's close to the descendant, you're going to want to talk to the person about how they approach power dynamics in relationships, because that's what Pluto is about. It's about who is, quote unquote, in control in a relationship. Okay? Now, don't forget that part, because I'm gonna pull up the Sinistry in a moment, and when you see what's there when it comes to Pluto, I think you're gonna find it quite interesting. Okay, so let's take a moment, see if there's anything else here that we want to talk about before we get on to the Sinistry. Oh yes. Okay. We have Jupiter and Saturn conjunct in the chart in the 12th house. Now, as you know, Jupiter and Saturn have very opposite jobs. We have Jupiter as Mr. Good Time Charlie, and then we've got old stick in the mud Saturn. Okay, and both of them are trying to do opposite things. Every 20 years, astrologically, there's something called the Great Conjunction. And for those of you who are dark crystal fans like I am, I always hear Augur saying, "The Great Conjunction comes." Here on the Earth, the Great Conjunction is Jupiter and Saturn, and it happens once every 20 years or so. So right around the time that this was happening, a little bit after it likely, Hudson Williams was born. And so they're both in different signs, so it's not going to feel as powerful in his chart. But for him, likely, he has a nice balance of wanting to grow and being able to be cautious and take his time working on things. In this case, in the 12th house, we have Saturn in Taurus, which can be a very slow mover and someone who establishes boundaries very cautiously. And then we have Jupiter in Gemini, which can be a little bit challenging because it means that you're trying to see both the big picture and the small picture at the same time, and that doesn't always work. But for him, he was born at a time when the Great Conjunction at that time had just happened. All right, we'll clear this off. And let's look at the Sinistry. Now, once again, as a recap for those of you who weren't here, the next chart is a Sinistry chart. It has two wheels on the same chart. If you have not seen a bi-wheel, folks, it's going to melt your brain a little, so I apologize in advance for that. Let's take a look. All right. So how do you read one of these? Well, first of all, carefully. Go! Anyway, Hudson Williams' chart is the inner ring. Connor Storrie's chart is the outer ring. Now, I specifically chose Hudson Williams' chart to be on the inner ring because we have a birth time for Hudson Williams. So we can see where, generally, Connor Storrie's planets fall and how they connect with Hudson Williams. So this line, this 12 Gemini, which you'll remember from the last chart, is Hudson Williams' rising sign. And so all of the lines, the house cusps, are all Hudson Williams. So how do we read this? Well, we would say, for example, that Connor Storrie's moon is sitting in Hudson Williams' 5th house, as a for example. Okay? That's how we would read that. So we're looking for different areas of the chart, the different planets, and how they come together. Okay? When someone comes to me and wants me to look at compatibility for them, this is one of the activities that I do. This is one of the studies that I do. This is a Sinistry chart. There are a couple of different ways to do a Sinistry chart. There are also other progressions and other more complex things that we can do to look at Sinistry. But this is really where it begins. This is where the rubber meets the road. So we're looking for commonality. So take a look. So we have outer planets that are similar because the two were born around the same year, right? So we have one born in February 22nd, 2000. That's Connor. And then about a year later, we have Hudson Williams. So a lot of the outer planets are not going to change much. We've got Hudson Williams at 21 Aquarius for Uranus, and then Connor Storrie has Uranus at 17 Aquarius. Again, even though we don't have a time for Connor Storrie, there's going to be very little change in Uranus' position over the course of a day. So I'm not really worried about that. If I look at Neptune, Hudson Williams at 6 Aquarius. And then we've got Connor Storrie at 5 Aquarius. As we know, Connor Storrie has that really nice Venus-Neptune conjunction in his chart. So Hudson Williams' Neptune actually makes a conjunction to both of these, which as actors is wonderful. I mean, the fact that we get Venus involved as well in Connor Storrie's chart is just great. It's just going to make the chemistry between them better. As we move further over, Uranus in Connor Storrie's chart also makes a connection to Hudson Williams' Mercury. So on a communicative level, they're probably in pretty good shape. Now, the thing about the communication piece is that Connor Storrie has his Mercury over here. So likely there will be some understanding, but on a straight communication level, these two communicate very, very differently. So what may happen is Hudson Williams does a lot of the talking, and Connor Storrie kind of, jumps in when he can. That's kind of what I would expect. But definitely Hudson Williams is going to be the more outgoing of the two, almost certainly. Even though we have sun signs that are different, as we said, Connor Storrie has a Pisces sun, and then we have Aquarius sun with Hudson Williams. Those two planets are almost conjunct. They're about 8 degrees apart. When you have a sun sign degree that's close to someone else's, there's going to be a pretty good affinity already. Okay? There's going to be a pretty good connection. This is why if you meet people that are around your birthday, you will tend to get along well with them, at least at first, because the sun connection between the two suns is going to be powerful. And so I know that when I've met people who have the same birthday as me or have birthdays very close to me, my very, very close friend of like 40 years, Wendy, was born the day before I was. And she and I have always gotten along extremely well. Not really surprised, because we have suns that are just about a degree apart, not even. So it was very close. Okay, so for these two, the sun is a little bit wide as far as connections, but there's still going to be a connection there. Okay, not as close as as it could be, but there's definitely a connection there. These two probably genuinely do. At least on the surface, get along. Now this one, whoo boy, this is a connection that is really interesting. You have Hudson Williams' Venus and Connor Storrie's Mars. That is an incredible relationship connection. If these two people were in a relationship in real life, that would be one of the highlights of what I would talk about with them, because they're very, very connected. But when you have a planet when you have one planet in your chart and it's someone else, and it's a different planet in someone else's chart, they feel it differently. So, for example, the relationship between the two of them, Hudson Williams probably feels the closeness of the relationship. With Venus, they both desire the same things, right? Or he desires. Okay, what he desires is the thing that Connor Storrie acts on, because Connor Storrie's Mars is in Aries. Now, speaking for hockey, Like Mars in Aries is phenomenal for any kind of athlete or anyone who does training professionally with their body, or anybody who does a job that requires their body, soldier, law enforcement, athlete, any of that. Mars in Aries is excellent and has a tremendous amount of drive. But the fact that they're in a relationship together on screen and have that connection, that's a real life strong connection too. They probably feel very close. All right, we have a couple more minutes left, so let's talk about one last piece of the puzzle here. And earlier, I mentioned that you wanted to remember Pluto. Now again, you're thinking, John, these two guys were only born like a year apart. So of course, the Pluto signs are going to be similar. Absolutely. Okay, we have Connor Storrie at 12 Sag, and we've got, excuse me, we've got Hudson Williams at 14 Sag. But it's not that they have the same Pluto sign, because millions of people are part of the Pluto and Sagittarius generation. What they have is this, which is Hudson Williams descendant. Now, a moment ago, when we had Hudson Williams' chart up alone, we knew that he had Pluto on the descendant. Well, Connor Storrie, we don't have a time for, but we know that his Pluto is on Hudson Williams' descendant. Whew. The relationship implications of this one, folks, are big, because this means both of them are going to feel very intensely. If I were counseling these two as a couple astrologically, what I would probably say to them is, hey, look, you two need to figure out how to make this relationship work without having to fight about it. And what is the relationship between these two in the series? Well, they are both on rival hockey teams. And the 7th house, ladies and gentlemen, is the house of open enemies. If someone that knows you and someone else knows that you really can't stand that other person, and that other person really can't stand you, that's an open enemy. That's a 7th house deal. So in public, these two are open enemies. It's really interesting how the Pluto placements for them both are so incredibly close to Hudson Williams' rising sign. Now again, we don't have a time for Connor Storrie, so I don't know exactly where his is. If I did, I would flip this so you could see where this conjunction comes in Connor Storrie's chart. But since we don't, we work with the anchor, with Hudson Williams' chart as the anchor. Okay? But yeah, this is where astrology can get a little bit literal. Okay? Sometimes it can become a little too literal, like, you know, Alicia Liu and frozen water and having such a strong Neptune. That sort of thing. Okay? But this series, I can tell you right now, is going to be very, very intense. These two actors are quite well connected, especially that Pluto connection is going to be a very strong power struggle sort of deal. Now, once again, I will also say that Pluto, in addition to being about power and control, also has an extremely sexual overtone. Pluto often will be a part of the sexual profile in astrology. And so the fact that these two are intimate partners in their roles and open enemies, that's pretty incredible. I mean, when I saw that, I was just floored. But I'm hoping that through looking at these charts, you see that you can apply what we're talking about tonight to any chart. Okay, yeah, it takes some practice and a little bit of study, a wee bit here or there. But if you look at the planets and you start by knowing what the planets do, one of the most basic things you can look at is the different angles on a chart, especially ascendant and midheaven, descendant and nadir. Okay, if you see a planet within 5 degrees of any of those, you need to make sure you're focusing on it, because likely that's going to be important in the person's life and probably rather obvious. Anyway, I'd like to take a moment to offer you the opportunity to ask any questions. Thank you for your patience. I know we went through these charts pretty quickly. All right, folks. Well, thank you as always for coming out and watching the stream. I sincerely appreciate it. I hope you've learned a thing or two. This series looks amazing. I am actually going to start watching it so I can see how it progresses. Oftentimes, you will see the charts of the actors come through in anything that they do. So I'm going to be watching very closely for that as I watch the series. No spoilers, though, because I haven't started watching it, okay? Anyway, I hope you have a great night. Next week, I will be off. I will not be here. But the week after next, I will be back and I will be announcing on my social medias what the chart of the next Twitch stream will be. If you have suggestions for me, please feel free to send them along. If you ever would like to have your chart looked at online, if you're comfortable with that, I would be more than happy to do it. Just let me know, folks. Anyway, I hope you have a great 2 weeks, and I look forward to seeing you in early May. Ciao.